Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Alvarez, and I'm going to be discussing Bardach and Potashnik's practical guide to policy analysis, and specifically identifying the problem, which is step one of the 8 different steps to policy analysis. So, the 8 steps that Bardach and Potashnik identify are: one, define the problem; two, assemble some evidence; three, construct the alternatives; four, select the criteria; five, project the outcomes; six, confront the trade-offs; seven, stop, focus, narrow, deepen, and decide; and eight, tell your story. So I'll be covering the first step in this presentation, which is deceptively complicated. Defining the problem consists of multiple parts. So here we go. To begin with, Bardach and Potashnik identify that you should be thinking in terms of deficit and excess. So in other words, think of whether there's too much or not enough of something. So one of the examples that they provided is, there's too many homeless people, or that there's not enough water to support the agricultural industry in an environmentally effective way. Now, one of the things to consider as well is that Dr. Sundstrom has advised policy analysts to be cautious with the lack of or not enough problem, as a lack of resources is truly not a problem. So just take that into consideration when you review Bardach and Potashnik's guide. Now, as far as the next steps in defining the problem, you also want to make the definition evaluative. So what Bardach and Potashnik mean, or try to focus on, is that the defined problem should be able to be evaluated. So they discuss that a problem can mean something is wrong, but this notion of right or wrong is debatable and is subject to evaluation. Now, one of the things that they do point out that I find interesting is that, in essence, private industry issues should remain private, or not public sector issues that need to be addressed, unless there's some sort of market failure. And so market failures include negative externalities such as pollution or monopolies, as well as other items that essentially create a problem for the public good. Excuse me. Now, one of the things that are discussed, or that Dr. Sundstrom discusses or addresses with regard to this item, is by pointing out that there's an ideological spectrum. And she addresses this as a way to really provide the policy analyst with a frame of mind as far as the different viewpoints that a policy can be viewed from. So, for example, a problem that a communist, or an issue that a communist sees as a problem, might not be an issue that an anarchist sees as a problem. So Sundstrom does point out that there is an ideological spectrum, and along those lines, what is government's role in addressing those issues? As you move closer towards the left, more government is desired. As you move toward the right, less government is desired. Potashnik and Bardach also identify that using issue rhetoric should be done cautiously. So essentially, be careful when you use or identify a problem that has terms that are politically charged. These different terms or rhetoric may combine or confuse multiple issues, and it could muddy the waters. The way that Sundstrom addresses this is by advising analysts to use neutral language when addressing problems, and analysts should not identify with a specific ideology, so using any politically charged terms would be inadvisable. Another aspect of defining the problem that Bardach and Patashnik use is this idea, or this notion, that uncertainty is the problem that evaluation addresses. In other words, they're saying that if there is an uncertainty regarding the benefit of a program or a policy or any problem, this uncertainty in and of itself is the problem. So while Sundstrom doesn't address this specifically, she does give us the notion that we don't want to confuse program evaluation with policy analysis. And this whole idea of wondering whether or not a program is beneficial or policy is beneficial might be more in the program evaluation area. And so just be cautious of that. Bardach and Patashnik do point this out as a way to identify a problem, but just proceed with caution. Bardach and Patashnik identify that you should quantify the problem if you can. Ideally, if you use terms of, something is too big, well, how big is too big? Bardach and Patashnik say, you should guesstimate if necessary. And the example that I show is that, there's a big difference between this guy saying, we have a problem, versus this guy telling his boss or whoever he's talking to that the ferry that's holding the 300 cars is sinking. So that's a quantified problem. So in essence, Sundstrom also suggests quantifying the problem, period. She doesn't indicate that we should guesstimate, but get the specific numbers that are related to the problem that you're talking about. You also want to diagnose conditions that cause problem, or at least that's what Bardach and Patashnik say. They identify that it might be useful to diagnose one aspect of the overall problem and identify this issue as a problem that must be resolved to address the overall issue, which is kind of convoluted, and again, I don't think Sundstrom would recommend this. She would again probably say that you should maintain neutrality, because the lack of something may or may not be a problem, but in either case, by suggesting that one of the diagnosis is a problem, it could be troublesome. So the example that Bardach and Patashnik uses, one of the problems in the air pollution area is that the state has not been willing to force motorists to keep engines tuned up and their exhaust system in proper order. So in essence, they're implying that the motorists not keeping their cars tuned up is the problem. So we'll discuss this a little bit further on, but this could be kind of problematic. So I would kind of stick with Sundstrom's recommendation of just maintaining neutrality when you're trying to identify the problem. Bardach and Patashnik, say don't use the odds or any sort of probabilities to define a problem, because it's really not tangible. So when you try to use there's a higher likelihood of something occurring, is not really, you can't really quantify that. So Sundstrom mirrors this assessment by saying that you should maintain neutrality and quantify the problem at all times. Now, some of the common pitfalls that Bardach and Patashnik point out is, don't define the solution within the problem. So, for example, they say, If your problem is stating that there is too little shelter for homeless families, that's implying that we need more shelters. So that sort of problem definition is not appropriate. You might want to say instead that there are too many homeless families to address that. The other problem that they identify is accepting the causal claims implied by the diagnostic problem definition, which falls back to the earlier slide about the air pollution thing. So there's a pitfall in that you may accept that linked causal claim as the problem definition, and that's really not appropriate. So those assumptions can be remedied by not using that diagnostic problem definition. So, and again, Linda Sundstrom advises us all to maintain neutrality, and that, again, lack of something may not be a problem. The final point that Bardach and Potashnik make is that we should be, constantly reviewing the definition of the problem, because it might evolve over time. So it should be an iterative and reiterative process when you're reviewing the definition of the problem. And I think Sundstrom identifies this concept through the post-empiricist methodology for policy inquiry that she pointed out in our first few lectures. So we should use this to kind of, be skeptical in how we're reviewing this policy as a problem, and kind of drill down to the core to make sure we're clear on what that problem should be. So keep asking yourselves questions as you go through this definition phase so that we can have a clear understanding of what the definition should be. And ultimately, once you've defined the problem, you can move on into the rest of the steps to complete your policy analysis. Thank you very much.